To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In the heat of a Maryland summer in 1979, a young woman's life was brutally cut short, and for over 4 decades, the case went cold. Vicki Lynn Belk was just 28 years old when she vanished, her vibrant future stolen in an instant. For years, investigators pored over evidence, haunted by the lack of answers. But it wasn't until the power of modern forensic science, DNA technology that didn't even exist when Vicki was murdered, that the truth began to surface. In this episode, we dive deep into how cutting-edge forensic breakthroughs finally gave Vicki a voice, and how a persistent pursuit of justice turned silence into revelation. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 284, The Murder of Vicki Lynn Belk. In the summer of 1979, 28-year-old Vicki Lynn Belk was balancing multiple roles in her life: a hard-working single mother to her son Lamont, and a dedicated professional with a career at the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. Vicki was the child of the civil rights era, born into a prominent family in Alexandria. Her mother, Maydell Beck, was a significant figure in the desegregation of Alexandria public schools. In fact, when Vicki was just in 3rd grade in 1960, she became one of the first African American students to integrate into the same school system as white kids. That milestone was just the beginning for Vicki. She eventually became the first person in her family to attend and graduate college. By 1979, Vicki had built a successful career as a program analyst at the Department of Agriculture. She was also a devoted mother to her son Lamont. And on top of juggling parenthood and work, she had a boyfriend, James Hill. Vicki split her time between staying with her family in Alexandria and at James's place, trying to make all of it work. Monday, August 27th, 1979, started like any other day for most people in Washington, D.C. But for Vicki, it would be the last day anyone saw her alive. That morning, Vicki and James left the house together to make sure they both arrived at work on time. They drove in James's car, parking at a commuter lot downtown. From there, they took the metro toward the Department of Agriculture building. According to James, Vicki had asked him if she could borrow his car during the lunch hour to go run some errands, and he said yes. Before leaving, Vicki stopped by James's desk, gave him a kiss, and picked up the keys to his car. That was the last time he ever saw her. The plan was for Vicki to pick up James using his car after work, but she never showed up. When 5 o'clock rolled around and James finished his workday, Vicki was nowhere to be found. James decided to head toward that commuter parking lot, hoping he would find her there. But when he arrived, not only was Vicki missing, but the car was gone as well. Vicki's coworkers later reported that she never returned back from her lunch break, which immediately raised alarms. It wasn't like her to just disappear without telling anyone. Her coworkers knew that something had to be wrong. By the next morning, August 28th, Vicki still hadn't been seen. She hadn't returned home to her family's place in Virginia, and she wasn't at James's place in Maryland. That's when James decided to report her missing to the Prince George's County Police Department. At first, the police took the situation seriously. Although Vicki was an adult, she had a strong reputation for being responsible. It was completely out of character for her to simply vanish, so the police began their search. But the investigation looked a lot different back then. Today, investigators could track Vicki's cell phone records, see where her phone last pinged, and check GPS data from her boyfriend's car. Cameras would have likely captured her movements that day. But in 1979, missing person investigations didn't have those tools. No cell phones, no GPS, no surveillance footage. The police had to rely on traditional methods, speaking to potential witnesses and asking around. Even though the search was limited by the technology at the time, it didn't take long for a break. The next day, a local teenager was riding his bike when he noticed a body on the ground in a wooded area off Metropolitan Church Road and Route 227. It didn't take long to determine that Vicki had become the victim of foul play. Besides being sexually assaulted, she had also been shot once in the head. Right away, Vicki's case was being treated as a homicide. It was clear she hadn't simply taken off with her boyfriend's car that day. Her body was discovered about 20 feet off the main road. She wasn't hidden or buried, just far enough off the road that a passerby could easily overlook her. She was lying on her back with her dress pulled up above her waist. She was naked from the waist down, and her arms were folded neatly at her sides. Based on the scene, investigators believed her body had been intentionally dumped there. Almost immediately, Vicki's boyfriend James became the prime suspect. I say this a lot on the show, but it's true. When a woman is murdered, the boyfriend or the husband is often looked at as being the first person of interest. It's standard procedure, and this case was no exception. But there was another reason investigators wanted to speak with James: what they learned from Vicki and James's coworkers. When police interviewed their colleagues, they got mixed feedback about their relationship. Some people said that James and Vicki were a happy couple, normal couple stuff. But others painted a different picture. A few coworkers described James as controlling, heavy on the drinking, and possibly abusive. These conflicting stories raised some red flags for investigators. So naturally, the police leaned in closer on James. But from day one, James was cooperative. He told investigators he had nothing to hide and that he loved Vicki. He would never hurt her. And most importantly, he had a solid alibi. According to his coworkers, James was at the Department of Agriculture all day. No one saw him leave at any point. Investigators confirmed his timeline and were able to verify that, yes, he was at work at the time they believed she was killed. James also allowed them to search his apartment. They combed through everything and found nothing suspicious, no physical evidence linking him to Vicki's murder. So at this stage, James didn't look like he was the killer. He had an alibi, he cooperated fully, and there was nothing in his apartment to tie him to the crime. Sometimes the boyfriend is innocent. Back at the location where Vicki's body was found, detectives searched for any evidence they could collect. But there wasn't much to go on. Aside from Vicki's clothing, nothing useful was recovered. No foreign shoe prints on the ground, no murder weapon, no obvious clues. Next came the autopsy. The most important discovery was that the medical examiner recovered the bullet that had been fired into Vicki's head. They were also able to confirm that she had been sexually assaulted. But like I mentioned earlier in the episode, this was 1979. DNA testing wasn't a tool in most police departments' toolbox yet. So while they could confirm that Vicki had been raped, they had no way to identify the person. Still, the autopsy wasn't a complete waste. Investigators carefully preserved everything they could: her clothing, DNA samples, blood, biological material, anything that might help down the line. They held on to it, hoping that one day forensic science might catch up. Maybe not that year or the next, but maybe someday. That same day Vicki's body was discovered, police received another phone call. James's car had been found. This was the car Vicki had taken during her lunch break. It was located abandoned in southeast DC, not far from that commuter lot. Police towed the vehicle and brought it in for processing. They dusted it for fingerprints, nothing. They checked it for blood, again, nothing. The car was surprisingly clean. But again, this was late 1970s. No cell phones, no GPS tracking, no security cameras on every corner. So detectives had to do it the old-fashioned way. Canvass neighborhoods, knock on people's doors, and talk to them. Sometimes that kind of work pays off, but sometimes it doesn't. And unfortunately, in Vicki's case, it didn't. Police canvassed the area where her body had been found, as well as where the car was abandoned. They interviewed people, they asked questions, but no one had seen anything. They talked to coworkers, friends, and family members. Still, nothing solid. What had started off as a hopeful, fast-moving investigation suddenly went ice cold. Weeks turned into months, months turned into years, and eventually, years turned into decades. Vicki Belk's murder remained unsolved, but that doesn't mean there weren't theories or suspects over the years. Vicki's case wasn't the only unsolved homicide in Washington, D.C., so police considered whether her murder might be connected to other cases. Could she have been the victim of a serial rapist or serial killer? Was she specifically targeted? But those were just theories. Yes, crime patterns emerged throughout the D.C. area over the years, but nothing ever directly linked them back to Vicki's case. There were still so many unanswered questions. Where was she killed? How did someone abduct her in broad daylight? She left work around lunchtime and never returned. So what could have happened in just those few short hours? Did she know her killer? Was it someone she trusted? Or was this a completely random act of violence? For Vicki's family, the lack of answers was incredibly painful. They couldn't imagine who would want to harm her. By all accounts, she was a loving mother, a dependable coworker, and just a good person. So if it wasn't her boyfriend James, then who? Who would want someone like Vicki Belk dead? Even though the case went cold relatively quickly, that didn't mean investigators gave up. Vicki's clothing and other items were carefully stored in the evidence locker, and detectives remained hopeful that someday, somehow, a break would come. Maybe a new witness would step forward, or maybe, just maybe, science would eventually catch up. Not every investigation is handled perfectly, but in this case, the original detectives did one thing very right. They preserved the evidence. Back in 1979, they didn't have the forensic tools that we have today, but they still saved everything they could. And not only did they preserve it, they preserved it well. So when the time came and science advanced, there was still viable evidence left for them to test. That's not always the case. In a lot of cases from the 1970s, even earlier, police departments didn't keep the evidence. They didn't preserve the victim's clothing. They didn't take fingernail scrapings. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know that they should. But thankfully, in Vicki's case, the original detectives from 1979 kept almost everything. Fast forward to 2007. The case is now 28 years old. That's when investigators decided to take another look. They picked up the phone and called Vicki's family to let them know that the case was being reopened. They didn't make any promises. They didn't want to give them any false hope, but they wanted them to know they hadn't forgotten. They were still working on this. By 2007, DNA and forensic testing had come a long way since the late 70s. So there was a real chance they might find something new. One of the first things they wanted to retest was Vicki's dress, the one she had been wearing when she was killed. But here's the thing. This was 2007. DNA testing was happening, but it wasn't as sensitive or advanced as it is today. And on top of that, it took forever. If you think DNA testing takes a long time now, today, it probably took 3 times as long back then. Still, before sending anything off for testing, investigators stopped and reconsidered. They decided not to test the evidence, at least not yet. Why? Because every time you test a piece of evidence for DNA, you use up part of the sample. And if the testing didn't turn up anything useful, that evidence might not be able to be tested again in the future once technology inevitably improves. So rather than risk destroying valuable evidence with limited testing methods, they held off. They waited. And while they waited, they also explored other options, including taking another look at the bullet that killed Vicki. The medical examiner had recovered the bullet during Vicki's autopsy. So over the years, the bullet was compared to others collected in different crimes. The hope was that maybe the same gun had been used in another case. And eventually, that strategy paid off. The bullet that killed Vicki was linked to a gun used in a robbery that had occurred in the same area. But here's the problem. By the time investigators made that connection, the bullet from the robbery case had been lost. So although the link was made, they couldn't move forward with comparing the bullets side by side. And back in 2007, that left investigators in a tough position. They had no murder weapon, and they still were hesitant to try DNA testing, afraid they'd destroy evidence that might be crucial once technology improved. So once again, the case was put on hold. Another decade came and went, then several more years passed. It was now 2022, 43 years after the crime. That's when detectives assigned to Vicki's case learned about a new and very effective DNA extraction method, and they wondered if it could be used here. They still had all of Vicki's clothing, so the hope was maybe this new technology could pull DNA from something that they had preserved since 1979. In 2022, they sent Vicki's dress and a few other items to the lab. This would be the first time DNA testing had ever been attempted, and almost immediately, the lab found something. They recovered an unknown male DNA profile on her clothing. Once that DNA profile was developed, it was uploaded into CODIS, the National DNA Database. And within days, they got a hit. After 43 years, detectives finally believed they had found Vicki's killer. The DNA matched a man named Andre Taylor, a name that had never come up before in the investigation. He had never been questioned, never considered a suspect. But that didn't mean Andre Taylor was a stranger to law enforcement. As it turns out, Andre Taylor had a very lengthy criminal record. He'd been arrested multiple times for violent crimes throughout the Washington, D.C. area, which also explains why his DNA was in CODIS. He'd been required to submit samples during multiple prior arrests. In one case, he was accused of shooting a man during an armed robbery. And after Vicki's murder, he became a suspect in at least 2 other homicides. So to say this was a bad guy would be a massive understatement. When detectives dug deeper into Taylor's background, they learned something else. At the time of Vicki's murder in 1979, Taylor had been living on Bryan's Road. That's less than 4 miles from where her body was found. He also had ties to the area of Washington, D.C. when she was abducted. So now detectives knew he wasn't just a DNA match, he was also in the right place at the right time. As soon as they had confirmation from the lab, investigators started trying to track Taylor down. But there was a problem. No one knew where he was. He hadn't had a known address since 2019. So a search began. With help from Homeland Security investigators, the D.C. Metropolitan Police Homicide Unit, and the U.S. Secret Service Baltimore Field Office, eventually they found him. Taylor was still living in Washington, D.C. He was arrested on June 22, 2023, charged with the 1979 rape and murder of Vicki Belk. The arrest involved multiple agencies, including the Charles County Sheriff's Office, Criminal Investigations Division, the CCSO Warrant Fugitive Unit, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Capital Area Regional Fugitive Task Force, and the Metropolitan Police Department. So you can imagine what the scene looked like in his neighborhood. All these law enforcement officers showing up at once. People probably looked out their window and thought, what the heck is going on out there? After more than 4 decades, investigators finally had their guy. And unlike so many other cold cases, this time the suspect wasn't dead. Andre Taylor was still very much alive. Initially, when questioned by the police, Andre Taylor admitted to sexually assaulting Vicki back in 1979. At this point, he didn't have much of a choice. His DNA was found on her clothing, and the evidence was clear. But he denied killing her. He insisted he had nothing to do with that part of it. However, there was another major piece of evidence pointing toward his guilt: the gun. When Taylor was arrested in 2023, he was in possession of a .32 caliber firearm, the same type of gun used to shoot and kill Vicki. For Vicki's family, this was the moment they had waited 43 long years for. Someone had finally been arrested. And not only that, he wasn't some mystery figure lost to time. He was alive, in custody, and facing charges. But when the family heard his name, no one recognized him. He wasn't someone Vicki had ever mentioned. He seemed to be a complete stranger, which raised an even more disturbing question. Why? Why would someone who didn't even know Vicki target her like that? By June 2023, Andre Taylor was 61 years old. But at the time of Vicki's murder, he was just 18, barely an adult. And yet, he allegedly committed one of the most violent and horrific crimes imaginable. Here's what John Stackhouse, Assistant State's Attorney, said right after Taylor's arrest. Quote, "The incident caused generational trauma because it went on for 45 years. Vicki's son grew up without a mother. Her parents had to bury their daughter. Her parents had to lay on their deathbed not knowing who killed their daughter. Her grandchildren never got a chance to meet their grandmother. Yet all throughout this case, I've never seen a family with so much grit, determination, and grace. When you victimize someone like this and then murder them, it really doesn't get more horrific than that." End quote. 2 weeks after Taylor's arrest, a grand jury formally indicted him on multiple charges: first-degree murder, first-degree rape, and second-degree rape. Following the indictment, Vicki's sister released this statement. "Nearly 44 years ago, our family lost Vicki Lynn Belk, a beloved mother, sister, and friend, to a tragic and heinous crime. The news of the grand jury returning an indictment for the accused and the arrest in her murder begins the long-awaited process of justice finally being served." End quote. Following the grand jury's indictment, Andre Taylor was taken to the Charles County Detention Center and held without bail. That brings us to July 18th, 2024. After a 9-day trial and just 2 hours of jury deliberation, a Charles County jury found 63-year-old Andre Taylor guilty of first-degree murder and the first-degree rape of Vicki Belk, finally delivering justice 45 years later. Then came sentencing. On September 6th, 2024, Taylor was officially sentenced to life in prison. Here's what Charles County Circuit Court Judge James West said during that sentencing. Quote, "The crime is a horrific loss of life. The violence was extreme. The amount of fear and terror that preceded the violence doesn't exist in most cases. The incident was so heinous, I can't think of a lesser sentence that would be appropriate." Unquote. To this day, whether or not Taylor knew Vicki before the attack remains unclear. Her family and friends have never heard his name before, and there's been no evidence to suggest they had any connection, which makes this even harder to understand. How did this happen? The last known detail of Vicki's day is that she borrowed her boyfriend's car during her lunch break to run a few errands. But somehow, in broad daylight, that quick trip turned into her rape and murder. We still don't know where it happened, or how he got her, or how he managed to get away with it for so long. And the only person who knows the full truth is Andre Taylor. But despite admitting to sexually assaulting Vicki, he still insists he didn't kill her. After more than 4 decades, a case that had once gone cold finally found its spark. Thanks to advancements in forensic science and the relentless dedication of investigators, the mystery of who took Vicki Lynn Belk's life was no longer hidden in the shadows. In 2022, DNA testing, something unimaginable back in 1979, matched a sample from the crime scene to a man named Andre Taylor. He had been living in Washington, D.C. quietly for years. This breakthrough wasn't just about science, it's about justice. It was about honoring Vicki's memory, giving her family answers, and proving that time doesn't erase truth. The match was clear, the evidence was solid, and finally, after 43 years, Vicki's killer was identified and charged. DNA may just be a sequence of chemical letters to some people, but in this case, it's a voice, speaking for the victims when they no longer can. As we close this chapter, we remember Vicki not just for the tragedy that took her, but for the powerful reminder that no case is ever truly forgotten. Justice delayed is still justice served. To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/forensictales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Marianne C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley H., Danielle D., Chrissy D., Brett R., Luz Raquel, and Christine K. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.